Breaking news tonight in the death of Freddie Gray. The Baltimore Sun has obtained a copy of the medical examiner's autopsy report. The Sun says this report concludes that Freddie Gray suffered a single high-energy injury, most likely caused when the police van in which he was riding suddenly decelerated. The Sun goes on to say the state medical examiner's office concluded that Gray's death fit the medical and legal definition of an accident, but ruled it to be a homicide because officers failed to follow safety procedures through acts of omission. State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby released a statement saying, quote, "The state's attorney office did not release the Freddie Gray autopsy report. I strongly condemn anyone with access to trial evidence who has leaked information prior to the resolution of the case." 6 officers have been arrested in Gray's death with charges ranging from second-degree depraved heart murder to manslaughter. A trial has been set for October 13th. Joining me now is legal analyst Areva Martin, and joining me on the phone is Dr. Cyril Wecht, a former medical examiner and forensic pathologist. He is also a medical doctor and attorney. Areva, the report rules Freddie Gray's death a homicide based on, quote, acts of omission by the officers. What does this mean going forward?
I think what we should expect going forward, Reverend, is a big fight over what happened in that van and whether the charges that the state's attorney brought are overcharges. We know that one of the charges is second-degree murder. And in second-degree murder, there's some intentionality that has to be proved by this district attorney. The medical examiner is calling the death an accident. He says what likely happened is that Gray stood up in the van, and as the van decelerated, he was thrown into the side of the van, causing the serious injury that led to his death. We should expect the defense attorneys to seize on this statement by the medical examiner to argue that there's no intentionality on the part of any of these officers and that the district attorney overcharged in the case.
But after Freddie Gray's death, Areva, there was a lot of talk about police rough rides or nickel rides. The New York Times wrote at the time, it was when, quote, suspects seated or lying face down and in handcuffs in the back of a police wagon are jolted and battered by an intentionally rough and bumpy ride. So is this not also a possibility of what could have happened here?
Oh, absolutely, Rev, and we should also point out that the medical examiner said there were acts of omission by these police officers. He faults the police officers for not belting Gray or doing anything to him in that vehicle that would have prevented him from being thrown about in the vehicle in such a way that he would suffer such a severe injury. So we're going to hear a lot about what those police officers did, how they placed them in the van, and whether they took the proper precautions to avoid this kind of fatal injury from happening to him.
And whether they intentionally omitted it, even if they didn't know what the results would be. Dr. Wett, the report says Gray suffered a, quote, high-energy injury. What does that mean to you?
It means that as Mr. Gray lay on his abdomen, face down in a prone position, with his wrists and ankles tied, that van decelerated suddenly, causing his body to impact against the inner portion of the van, producing a severe injury to the head and neck, causing cervical vertebral fractures and almost completely transecting the cervical spinal cord. At that point, in essence, Mr. Gray was doomed to death. It would have required emergency medical treatment right on the spot, and possibly, if there had been any conceivable salvageability, it would have required them to have immobilized his neck immediately, something that they failed to do. You know, it's incredible here when you think that police officers in 2015 in a major metropolitan area would treat a human being like this. Go back and look at the training that they received as police officers. I would be willing to make a wager with anybody that included some discussions by paramedical people about how to treat individuals who had sustained injuries. Go to any football game and see the way in which somebody who is knocked down is handled. The first thing you do is you immobilize the neck for the very reason that damage to the cervical spinal cord can result in death. And if you survive, you'll be quadriplegic, paralysis of all forearms.
Now,
I don't understand. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me. But I want to follow up on this autopsy report. Let me go to you on this one, Areva. I'll come back to the doctor. The autopsy report also describes the fourth stop of the police van that it made. Quote, the assisting officer opened the doors and observed Mr. Gray lying belly down on the floor with his head facing the cabin compartment, and reportedly he was asking for help, saying he couldn't breathe, couldn't get up, and needed a medic. The officer assisted Mr. Gray to the bench, and the van continued on its way. Areva, this assisting officer has been charged with manslaughter. What could this report mean for her legally?
This is a very damaging statement for this officer. It shows that this officer had an opportunity to take precautions to get the medical attention that Mr. Gray needed, and she failed to do so. And I think it's also interesting to note, Rev, that throughout the report, the medical examiner talks about the multiple stops that were made. These officers had numerous opportunities to get Mr. Gray medical help, and they failed to do so. So much so that they were callous, because we also know that as he was moaning and groaning, we hear a lot about these moans and groans that he was making, obviously in severe pain, and no effort made by any of the officers involved to get him medical attention. I think that's going to be very damaging to the defendants, and it's going to help the prosecution prove at least those charges that don't require the more serious elements of murder.
Now, Doctor, the autopsy report does make note of drugs found in Freddie Gray's system. According to the Baltimore Sun, Gray tested positive for opiates and cannabinoid when he was admitted to Maryland Shock Trauma Center. According to the autopsy, the report makes no further reference to the drugs found in his system. Dr. Wett, what is the medical significance of this to you, if any?
There is no significance or relevance of any kind regarding the presence of opioids and cannabinoids in Mr. Gray. Had nothing whatsoever to do with his injuries, either in causing them or enhancing them or diminishing any opportunity for him to survive or to be treated successfully. None whatsoever. There was significant deceleration. Remember, Reverend, force equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. So what we're dealing here is a van that decelerates abruptly, and something that should be done, and I believe it must have been done, is to go over minute by minute, second by second, that route of the van, each of the 5 stops. What was it that caused that van to decelerate with that kind of abruptness that produced the force required to cause these injuries? Remember, Mr. Gray is a young man with strong bones. We're not talking about a 75-year-old woman with osteoporosis. You look at her and knock her down, and she'll break her hip and her knee. So it takes a lot of force. So the drugs had nothing whatsoever to do with it. I don't believe, as the medical examiner suggests, that he was able to stand up, maybe dig up Harry Houdini and demonstrate how somebody with the wrist and ankles tied down, lying on the floor, is able to get up. But that's a distinction without a difference. It doesn't make any difference whether he did get up, whether he was partially up. The point is that his body was hurled with great force against the inside of the van, producing those cervical vertebral injuries, almost transecting the spinal cord. That means that not only were there fractures, but there were significantly displaced fractures that cut across the cord. So, again, second-degree murder, manslaughter, that's a legal distinction without a difference morally and ethically here. The point is that these officers behaved abominably. the driver, there was somebody, at least one person among the 5 officers who was a superior rank, if not 2. Why didn't somebody intervene? They all stood by.
Well, that is going to be a question they're going to have to answer at trial. Thank you, Dr. Cyril Weck.
Thank you, Reverend.
And thank you, Areva Martin,
Thanks,
both of you, for your time.
Thank you.